Hey, I'm Jacob.
And I'm Dan. Jacob, did you enjoy science in school?
You know, it was one of my favorite subjects.
What was the coolest experiment you've ever seen?
You know, not at school, but at camp one time, we took a big watermelon and we placed elastic bands around it one at a time until there was so many and so much pressure that it just exploded.
That's awesome. I think science is so cool, but there's people out there that say that you have to choose between the Bible and science.
Yeah, I know. That's actually what our God story is about today. And we're gonna dig a little deeper into that. Let's watch it now and see what we can learn.
Why don't oysters share their pearls? Because they're shellfish. Hi everyone, it's Jen, and I'm really excited to be back with you today. You know, when I was a kid, I thought something pretty funny. I thought for some reason that chocolate milk came from brown cows. I have since learned as an adult that this isn't true, but it was kind of funny to believe that as a kid. Sometimes there are things we misunderstand because they weren't fully explained to us. When I was a kid, I used to think that I could only believe in the Bible or science, but I have since realized that that just doesn't make any sense. Today's big idea is the question, do we have to choose between science and the Bible? The quickest and easiest answer to that is no, we don't have to choose. But let me explain a little bit more. The Bible points us to Jesus. It was written to explain God's story. God is the God of science and all the rest. You could say he's the master scientist. But the reality is, the Bible isn't meant to be a science textbook. It's meant to tell a story, not dig into the scientific realm. And it was written initially to share with people who weren't asking the types of science questions that we ask today. These people were more concerned about not being killed off by a rival nation. Instead of clearly laying out the answers to our scientific questions, which people back then weren't even asking, the point of the Bible is to share God's unfolding story. I have a couple of examples to show you this. The first is to look at some poetry by a guy named David. Do you remember him? He was a little boy with a slingshot who defeated Goliath, became king, and he wrote lots of poems to God. One of his poems talks about the beauty of creation and how it points to the Creator. Let's check it out in Psalm 19. The heavens tell about the glory of God. The skies show that his hands created them. Day after day they speak about it. Night after night they make it known. But they don't speak or use words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into the whole earth. Their words go out from one end of the world to the other. God has set up a tent in the heavens for the sun. The sun is like a groom leaving the room of his wedding night. The sun is like a great runner who takes delight in running a race. It rises at one end of the heavens, then it moves across to the other end. Everything enjoys its warmth. What a beautiful poem. It really helps you feel the beauty and amazingness of our Creator. But here's what this poem doesn't do. It doesn't answer any scientific questions. Did God really set up a tent in the heavens for the sun? No, it was a poetic way of speaking. When we read this, asking scientific questions doesn't really make sense because that's not what the poem is for. But the poetry and imagery of a creator who set up a beautiful creation, that's the point. If you want to read another amazing psalm like that, there are lots of others, but I recommend you check out Psalm 104. There are other passages about the sun standing still and the earth being built on a firm foundation. These are not scientific descriptions because they were never meant to be that. What they were meant to do was to paint a picture so that ancient people could understand something in a way that made sense to them. As you get older and learn new things in science, let those things help you realize that God is so cool. He is an amazing creator that makes lots of amazing things. So to answer today's big idea question, do we have to choose between science and the Bible? I hope you've come to realize that the answer is a clear no. God is the God of science as much as he is the God of music, art, poetry, math, and all things. Well, friends, it's been really fun hanging out. I will see you later.
This was a total eye-opener for me. I grew up knowing that the Bible is God's way of communicating with us, but I think there's a lot of people out there that expect the Bible to explain everything about biology, science, and history, and it was just never written to do all those things.
And it's so weird that we do that too. It's like if we watched a movie and we expected to see why it was made and how it was made, instead of focusing on the story.
Yeah. This is our last week with Natalie, Jimmy, and the kids around the campfire, so let's see what they had to say about science and God.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Campfire. Tonight, we're gonna be talking about God and science. Do you guys have any questions about that kind of thing?
Some things in the Bible don't match science. What's the deal with that?
The Bible is not a science textbook. It's not. It never was. It was never designed to be that way. It tells God's story, and more importantly, it tells God's story with us. And so when people come with a Bible saying that it explains science or proves science or has to be one way, they're actually just wrong. It would be like if your history teacher came into your math class and started telling you about like the ancient Near East. You'd be like, I thought this was math class. Is there no addition or subtraction? It's kind of the same thing. The Bible is God's story and God's story with us. It refers to how the world works and how people interact with the world, but it does not, as a point, try and explain, scientific reason or anything like that.
Jesus says the mustard seed is the smallest seed, but it's not. Is he wrong?
Jesus lived actually in a certain culture and a time and a place. We call it the ancient Near East. And in that time, in that place, they actually believed that the mustard seed was the smallest of the seeds. And so Jesus wasn't wrong. He was making a point about something way bigger, way more important than what seed was actually the smallest of the seeds. But he used something that they knew in their own culture to make a big point about this whole idea of God's kingdom. So was he wrong? Well, to us, it might have sounded like he was, but in reality, in the actual culture that he lived in, they would have not had any questions about it.
Sometimes people put God and science on two sides of an argument. I'm kind of confused in the situation. Should I go with God or science?
Should I go with God or science? The answer is yes. Both. Both are, again, God is the originator of science. He's the divine energy that was breathed out and the world came about as a result. Now, you can believe one version or the other, but the way that the world works is actually filled with beauty, filled with specificity, filled with wonder, and that was intentional. So there's no reason to put God over here. If you're thinking about God, you can't think about science, or science over here. If you have a scientific mind or you're passionate about science, you can't believe in God. To exclude them both is sort of silly, right? It would be like, I like cereal, but I don't like milk. Well, no, they both go together. So it's kind of the same thing. Make sense? Yeah.
Man, again, great questions, you guys. I love that you're thinking about these kinds of things. And we're going to come back next time with more awesome questions. But for now, peace out.
When Jimmy explained the story of the mustard seed, it's like a light went on in my head. But what do we do when we stumble across another story where the facts seem a bit off?
We have to look for the message inside the story. We have to remember that the Bible isn't a history or science textbook. If we don't know about the culture of the time, we can ask our parents or a youth leader for more historical context.
That sounds pretty great. For now, we're gonna break into our small groups and see what this looks like in our lives.